Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm so happy to see you here. We are going to have an amazing speaker that's part of our community in just a minute. Britt is a very magical human. Britt Rasky is a licensed clinical social worker and provides services in Illinois and Colorado through her practice, Chameleon Counseling. Britt began her career as a school social worker and supported kids in special education. She has taken her training, experiences, and passion and developed a clinical practice for neurodivergent humans. Britt has also been a member since the founding of this council group, and this is the second time she's volunteered to share with us. Britt, thank you so much for giving our community this. And I'm so excited to learn more about IFS for neurodivergent populations.
Well, hi, everybody. My name is Britt, and I'm here today to talk about internal family systems, therapy, and neurodiversity. So who am I? Well, I didn't even realize that Marie would have this amazing intro about me, so I'll just kind of keep it brief, right? I'm an ADHDer and a former school social worker, and I transitioned to private practice during the pandemic. And now I work mostly with autistic and ADHD teens and adults, and I'm also level 2 trained in IFS. So here are the parts of me that volunteered to present today. First and foremost, I have a part of me that is so excited to give back. I've loved learning in this community. I've learned so much, and it's such a gift that I have a skill set that I'm able to kind of give back and continue sharing and learning. I also have a part of me that just loves IFS. It has transformed me both on a personal and professional level. And so it's just so exciting to be able to share that with all of you today. And then finally, there's a part of me that was very flattered by the positive response that this group gave me last time I presented. And so just want to continue that energy. But then there are parts of me that absolutely did not volunteer to present today. Right here, I have my school social worker ID, right? And that's kind of representing my imposter part. That's like, you're just a school social worker. You don't know what you're doing. Like, why are you talking to people? And that part wants to be very clear that I am not an IFS trainer. There are people out there that are really good at training for IFS. I'm just expressing today my own personal kind of views about it. I also have a part that is pretty upset that I'm putting myself in this vulnerable situation. It wants me to blend in. It wants me to be in the crowd. It doesn't like that I'm exposing myself, and it's appalled that I'm being recorded. So there's that part. And then finally, my avoidance part, represented there by my dog and my iPad. Presenting puts more on my plate. It's extra anxiety. So that avoidance part is a little bit annoyed that I've been very dysregulated lately because I have this thing, but I'm really excited to be here. And so when we look at, when we look at all these parts of me right now, we can see here all my parts, and in the middle is myself. So IFS is all about understanding the relationship between ourselves and our parts, but also the relationship that parts have with each other. And that's where the system model comes forward. So I'll continue kind of talking about this. But like I said, the goal for today is just to inspire your curiosity and your interest in the model in IFS, particularly with neurodivergent clients, simply because, like I said, I am not a trainer. So I'm going to just kind of talk briefly about what IFS is, and why I and others use it, and then maybe some tips for using IFS with neurodivergent clients, and then some resources and next steps. So what is IFS? It is an evidence-based form of psychotherapy that focuses on understanding the inner system of a client's parts. So I have here, pictures from the movie Inside Out. And while it's not an IFS movie, I think it does a really good job kind of showing the complexity of what happens inside of us, right? Like in the movie, the main character, when she's asked about what she loves to do, she starts talking about hockey, and she has that joy that comes from talking about hockey, but also that sadness that comes with the fact that she moved away from Minnesota and her hockey team. So when we can look at our client's internal system, we can help them understand what is going on and why, but then also help them access their self energy and help heal these parts that carry extreme burdens. I keep splitting. Okay, so IFS, a history. So I'll kind of briefly talk a little bit about what IFS, how it was founded. It was discovered by a family therapist named Dr. Richard Schwartz in the 80s. And he began to realize that the external family systems methods that he was trained to do just like really weren't working with more extreme behaviors like eating disorders and self-harm. So he would interview clients and they started to describe a cutting part or a binging part that would force them to do things they didn't want to do. So at first, Dr. Schwartz was like, okay, he's going to try to negotiate with these parts, get them to stop, but realized quickly that that really didn't work either. What he saw, right, was like he shares a story about how he had a client who had a cutting part and he got that part to agree not to cut the client. Well, then the next week, the client came in and had a huge gash down her face. So Dr. Schwartz was like, that's it. I give up. I can't beat you. And the client's cutting part responded with, I'm not trying to beat you. I just want to do my job. So Schwartz stayed very curious and he's like, well, what is your job? And the cutting part proceeded to describe how it needed to get the client out of her body when she was being abused and to control her rage, which would then bring on more abuse. So Schwartz realized really quickly that this cutting part inside of his client thought she was still being abused. It was stuck in the past. So a big thing was, how do we update our extreme parts, like the cutting part, to know that you're safe now and you don't have to work in such an extreme role, right? He also noticed that parts are connected kind of like family systems, right? He described how if you're talking to a cutting part, right, there's a part that cuts, and there's oftentimes the part that feels a lot of shame that you're a cutter, right? He noticed that if you ask the shame part to step back and you just interview the cutting part and you help it give it some of that self energy, that the client shifted and healing began to happen. And that was very similar to what he would see when he worked with family, right? He would ask dad to step outside when he would focus on the mom and son relationship. So what are parts, right? Parts are subpersonalities with their own perspectives, emotions, beliefs, behaviors, agendas, jobs. And it's very natural and universal to have that multiplicity. So parts tend to either be protectors or parts that need protecting, right? And so when we look at the protector parts, they are either trying to prevent you from being dysregulated or they're responding once the dysregulation happens. So an example, right, is like a people pleasing part is working hard to make sure to avoid social conflict or dislike or rejection, right? Versus maybe a binging part that you come after a long day of work, like I'm going to shovel, 15 Oreos into my mouth, right? That part thinks that I feel bad, so it's going to help me feel good. So in that sense, there are no bad parts. They're all trying to do something that they believe helps the system and helps the individual, right? An alcoholic part, right? There might be parts of the person that hate that they're an alcoholic. It might be ruining their life, but the alcoholic part is just believing it's hard. We're going to numb the person out. So when we can then understand that parts are oftentimes forced to take on these extreme roles because of the environment. I had a client talk about how when they were growing up, every time they come from school, the house was just empty. Everybody worked. So he would soothe himself by just kind of eating a lot. And that's kind of when he eats now a lot, he really connects to that inner child that soothe themselves with food. And parts may also carry burdens inherited by family or society. I'm about to kind of talk about this exile, right here. You can see a picture of me at 10 years old. Oops, I'll go back. Oh no, where am I? Okay, this picture of me at 10 years old, right? So she represents feelings of shame and embarrassment, right? And there's a couple of parts of me that protect that particular exile. One, right, this morning I was very much on edge. I wanted to make sure that I practiced enough. So that part of me that was like, I had anxiety in my chest all morning. It wanted me to practice. It wanted me to not make any mistakes. It didn't want me to be so vulnerable, right? So that was a protector. And by understanding that it just wanted me to do well, it helped my anxiety decrease a lot, right? And it was very much keeping that this little girl who feels a lot of shame and knows she's an outsider, she's a weirdo ADHDer, like it was helping protect her from being triggered, right? Another example is I am a Jewish person. So my family, I inherited a lot of parts of me that really want to fit in, right? There's something about, it's very, when Jews are kind of exposed, historically, we've been in a lot of, sticky situations, very dangerous situations. So my family really enforced to me, you gotta fit in, you don't want to stand out. So I have that social norms part of me that's always looking around me, like what are other people wearing? How are other people talking? What are other people doing? Keep up with that. And so in the same way, right, parts have polarizations within and also alliances. The part of me that wants me to do a lot of housework has an alliance with my cannabis part, because if I'm really high, it makes going through cleaning up my house a lot easier. So they have that alliance. And I'm not going to get too much into this, but when we're looking for parts within our clients, we can use this like the 6 F's, which is find, focus, flesh out, befriend, and fears. But really, that's what you learn in an IFS training. Oh, yeah, I believe in being honest. Like, and plus, thank God, cannabis is legal in my state and other states, and it's the truth, right? Okay, so here is a beautiful piece of art. When I first opened up my practice, I wanted to decorate my website with art that represented the neurodivergent experience from neurodivergent artists. So this is one of those pieces of artwork that I purchased. And so we don't really know what's going on for this dinosaur in this photo. All we can kind of assume is that there's a part of the dinosaur that is dysregulated, right? It could be that they want to fit in, but don't know how to join that group. It could be that they had a fight with their family member the night before. It could be anything. We don't know. But we do know there's a part of this dinosaur that's dysregulated, and that's what brought about this drawing part. And that drawing part is that protector, right, for this dinosaur. So when we work with a dinosaur like this, we're getting so much appreciation to their drawing part. We're really celebrating the fact that they have this protector that helps them through these dysregulated moments. But that also will help us kind of get kind of more curious about like what part of you is dysregulated and what did you need, and helping start those conversations about why that's okay. So more about the self, right? Everybody possesses self. Or self energy, which are those positive qualities and inherent wisdom that when you can assess them, they contain answers for the person and are the source of healing for parts. So the same way that when you cut yourself or have a paper cut, your body heals. And it's the exact same thing as that in IFS, we know that you have this core self energy that can heal traumatized parts, that can help your parts feel understood. And that's when we really help our clients have that self leadership, that self energy, which will help you stay balanced and like in a state of calm. So something an analogy that I like to use is a president and a cabinet, right? So if there is a hurricane, right? The president goes to a cabinet meeting and it's like, all right, there's a hurricane. What do we do, right? And the president expects there to be some conflict, right? The economy person is not going to agree with what the environment person says that we should all do, right? Or the foreign affairs person thinks that we should do. So the president expects there to be conflict, and the cabinet members respect the president that ultimately respect the leadership of the president. So if we take that analogy even further, right, if I'm at dinner with a couple of friends, right, and at the end of dinner, someone says, "Hey, do you want to go see that new horror film tonight? It sounds really awesome." And everyone around's like, "Yeah, that sounds really good." We check in with myself, right? I have a part of me that's like, "Hell no, I hate scary movies. I don't want to go to that." I have a part of me that's like, "Ugh, I was really looking forward to going home after this. I'm so exhausted. I don't want to go to a movie." But I also have a part of me that's like, they're going to think I'm weird, or they might not like me if I go home and they all stay. Maybe I have a part of me that fears I'll have some FOMO, right? So it's like in my head, I'm at the table with all these different parts, right? I'm there and we're going around and I'm understanding, of course, there's a part of me that's a little bit worried that they're not going to like me. They're going to think I'm being a problem, right? I get where that part comes from. I get that that's been with me for a long time. I also get why there's a part of me that's a little bit exhausted from the week. And I've already was masking for probably a couple hours at this meal in the first place. So in that moment, right, I may say something like, "No, thanks. I'm going to just go home, but we should do this next week, right? We should get together, right?" Or I might say, "Horror film isn't exactly what I would like, but I'm willing to go see a comedy movie." So when I represent that, I'm representing the needs of multiple parts and I'm respecting what's going on, because the last thing we want is for me to be driving home and kind of freaking out that I made the wrong choice. Oh my God, they think I'm weird now. They're not going to like me. They're not going to invite me to things, right? They're all going to have so much fun. I'm not going to be there. If I feel good about there's a need that I have, and the part of me that's freaking out is like, really young in its beliefs, it helps stay calm. So the 8 C's here that are listed are just kind of the 8 C's of when you're kind of in that self energy. Hope I'm not going too fast here. Okay, come on. Okay, so just kind of an overview of what I've kind of already kind of talked about, just kind of the basic assumptions of the IFS model. One, it is the nature of the mind to have all these different parts, and everyone has a self, and parts are forced into roles they don't like due to trauma and attachment injuries. Number four, the non-extreme intention of each part is something positive for the individual. So a lot of my clients, and I know it's in myself too, have a part of us that I call kind of the productive part. It's this pusher that's always like, "You're so behind. Everybody else is able to keep up, but you have to do all these things. Look at the state of your house. You're disgusting, right? And you're so behind," right? That productive part, right, is being extreme. It's kind of trying to use shame and harshness and meanness to like motivate me to do stuff, right? Well, what ends up happening is that I'll have this pusher productive part be like, "Do it, keep going, work so hard," right? Keep going. You have so much to do. But that overwhelms me with shame. And then I'll have a shutdown part show up and just avoid it more, right? So to help with this, IFS tries to help each part evolve, right? Because if that part that wants me to not be behind, wants me to have a clean house, wants me to not like do these things that I want to do, it just wants me to keep up because it cares about me. Right. So we want to times help it stop using so much shame and harshness, and instead help it kind of grow to being more of a cheerleader or motivating me in another way that might not bring about my shutdown parts. And number five, as we develop, our parts form a complex system of interactions internally, kind of like a family. And there's alliances and hierarchies and polarizations. And changes in the internal system will affect changes in the external system and vice versa. So those are the assumptions of the IFS model. And that really goes along well, I think, with the goals of IFS therapy, which is again to liberate the parts from their extreme roles, right? So, after this, I have a couple of hours before my next session. So there'll be a part of me that's going to be like, "You're so exhausted. You should go watch some television and relax." But there's also gonna be a part of me that's like, maybe you should do some yoga. Maybe there's also a part of me that's probably gonna be like, you should catch up on some of those things that have fallen behind since you've been putting this forward, right? And if I wasn't in that place of self leadership, I would be incredibly, I would be incredibly kind of overwhelmed with like, what should I be doing now? Right. So if I choose to get in bed after this, which I probably will, and watch some TV, right, I want to then soothe and have that self-leadership to tell my yoga part or my cleaning part. I'll get to that later. Right now, this is what I need in order to have the most energy to do something like yoga or to do something like cleaning my house, because it is a disaster right now. And again, it's all about achieving balance and harmony, and to bring more of that self energy to external systems. And I'll say a little bit more about that. So, why I use IFS? It's just incredibly non pathologizing, which makes it to me neurodiversity affirming. So, in IFS, we don't say that somebody is depressed. We say somebody has a depressed part of them, right? And we get super curious about, why is that part depressed? What is it afraid would happen if you go off and you try to get a job, or you go off and you do X, Y, and Z, right? It doesn't assume that somebody has a general anxiety disorder, that we're looking at what parts of you are anxious, right? Because oftentimes anxiety is a way that parts communicate with us. Parts, like I was talking about that productive part, it manifests as overwhelm and anxiety in my system, right? And so when I can understand that the anxiety I'm feeling, right, is, is this versus things, I'm just an anxious person, really understanding the why behind it helps people know what they need. In that sense, it's very strength-based and validating, right? People are always kind of weirded out of like, I'm having kind of positive feelings towards my anxiety, right? And that can be very life-changing, especially for our neurodivergent clients who oftentimes are dysregulated, oftentimes have anxiety, even little things, right? And some of our neurodivergent clients can really throw you off, right? So when you notice, like today, like I mentioned earlier, I had overwhelm for most of the week that wanted me to do well with this presentation, right? And so by being able to see it as, this is trying to help me, it's trying to push me, it allowed me to deal with it more and cope with it more and accept it more. I think it also builds self-esteem and self-acceptance. And I'll talk more about this too, but like, when you are neurodivergent, the whole world is always telling you that you're wrong and you're broken. And if you can kind of focus in on your internal system, you can connect to the parts of you that know you're not broken, that know you're just different. It allows you, how it allows us to really grow the parts of our clients who do love themselves. I also think it provides, again, strategies for an internal toolbox, like the example I explained kind of earlier about when you're in the moment in a social situation, right? I was able to think, okay, well, this is how I'm feeling, and kind of self-soothe myself and have a sense of, it's going to be okay, which is incredibly helpful. Um, in the same way, right, it increased our interpersonal and collaborative skills. If I know the parts of me in my own system, it begins to then help me stay curious about the parts of my friends and family, of my partner, right? If I'm cooking with my partner and he snaps at me during that process, right, there's a part of me that immediately is like offended and wants to like snap back. But there's also a part of me that's curious, like, what part of him just snapped at me? Is he okay? What's going on? Right? I know he's not trying to hurt my feelings, but he just did. So it really kind of gives, especially, sometimes with our autistic clients who aren't really sure about social stuff, it gives you the tools in order to understand yourself in social situations and possibly understand and be curious about what's happening with other people. I also think it's incredibly general too, where it works with a lot of different clients. It can work with extreme trauma. It also works with maybe more of that, you know, I guess big T versus little T trauma, but we all know it's all kind of the same. But I like how IFS is really general. It helps me with all of my clients. And it's also very concrete, right? And again, with that internal toolbox. If it has an ADHD, I'm all over the place all the time. It's chaos in my head, right? Well, with IFS, I can kind of organize. All right, there's a part of me right now that feels this. There's a part of me right now that feels that. So it really helps, I think, kind of identify and organize for people who maybe executive functioning, it feels very chaotic in there. And so why they use IFS. I know Bobby's actually here, Bobby Joe's here, but I asked a couple of colleagues about why they like IFS, and they kind of said some of the same things. It's very validating. It's not pathologizing, right? Because, and here's something I think Bobby said that was really helpful, right? Which is like, we're always told that we're too much and also not trying hard enough. So with IFS, we're able to find that balance of, man, it's totally understandable that I'm both thrilled while I'm eating this donut, but also miserable while I'm eating this donut, right? It helps hold space for all of our different feelings and in this accepting way. Because as neurodivergent people, we have feels, we really do. Okay, so here's a quote from a former client of mine who said that learning parts vocabulary not only made it um, and I know that sometimes when I'm in a webinar or a training or something and people talk about meditation, the part that immediately is like, perfect. I'm not going to listen to this. I'm not going to participate. So I welcome you. I invite you to participate if you would like to. You also obviously do not have to. So hopefully everyone can hear, but I do invite you to kind of get comfortable. Maybe you definitely close your eyes. You really want to make the most of this meditation.
And to lead the exercises, helping you get to know your parts. And we're going to start today by helping you get to know one of your protectors. So to do that, take a second and get comfortable. If it helps, you can take some deep breaths. And I'm going to invite you to scan your body and your mind, noticing in particular what kind of thoughts are there and emotions and sensations or impulses. So we're just noticing what's there right now. And as you do that, notice also if one of those emotions or thoughts, sensations or impulses seems to want your attention, seems to be calling to you. Or if not, maybe just pick one to focus on. And then go ahead and focus on it and see if you can find where it seems to be located primarily in your body or around your body. And as you notice it, notice also how you feel toward it. In other words, do you dislike it, or does it annoy you? Do you fear it? You want to get rid of it? Do you have a relationship with this thought, emotion, sensation, impulse? And I'm going to invite you to see if you can open your mind to it rather than be angry at it or afraid of it. So do that. Just see if the parts of you that feel these other things are willing to relax a little bit and give you the space inside to get to know it without an attitude. If these other parts won't separate and you can't get to that curious place, that's okay. You can just spend the time talking to the parts that won't separate or relax and talk to them about what they're afraid would happen if they actually let you interact with the target part. But if you do find yourself feeling curious about the target part, then it's safe to begin to get to know it. And by get to know it, I mean, as you focus on it, go ahead and ask if there's something it wants you to know about itself, and then just wait for an answer. Don't think of the answer. Just wait silently while you focus on that place in your body and see what comes back from it. And if nothing comes, that's okay too. If you did get an answer, then ask this part what it's afraid would happen if it didn't do whatever it's doing inside of you. What's it afraid would happen if it didn't do what it does? And then just wait for the answer to come without thinking. To answer that question, that you probably learned about what it's trying to do to protect you or what it's protecting. And if that's true, then see if you can extend some appreciation to it, or at least trying to keep you safe. And then just see how it reacts to your appreciation. And the final question for this part is, what does it need from you going forward? What does it need from you in the future? And when the time feels right, you can begin to shift your focus back to the outside world, but also be sure to thank your parts for whatever they shared and let you do in there. And also let them know this isn't their last chance to talk to you, as you plan to get to know them even more as you go through the book.
I hope you were.
Okay, so I invite you to kind of come back. I hope that that kind of helped, with the meditation just kind of helped explain what I mean when I talk about parts and protectors. and just kind of what the process is. I don't have nearly as soothing of a voice as Dick Schwartz does. So that's why I put in, but I definitely recommend the book No Bad Parts. I like the Audible version because it does have these like several meditations that are included with it. So No Bad Parts is a really good book that's a good intro to IFS, and also it's a good book for clients to read about IFS. And again, I always recommend the Audible version. Oh, well, thank you. They say I prefer my voice. We'll see, maybe one day. Okay, so just some common neurodivergent protectors, and none of this is going to be all that confusing or strange because this is stuff that everybody works with as as us as therapists. And I do want to draw your attention before I talk about this next piece of artwork from a neurodivergent artist that is explaining his neurodivergent experience. And I thought it's just so beautiful. But yeah, so common protectors, again, like the biggest thing about IFS is that we view that there's a suicidal part. We view that there's a self-harm part. So, common, protectors, a lot of times the most common I would say are those avoidance parts or those shutdown parts, where, because we're so easily burned out as neurodivergent people, because we don't have as much spoons, right? Like we have parts that will just shut us down. Maybe you're in Target and there's too many lights, or it's just you've been putting so much work in, you just need to recharge. So I see a lot of those like dissociation shutdown parts, and the problem is that I think a lot of times with my clients, right, they have parts of them that are really they really dislike those avoidance parts. And oftentimes those are the I should be doing XYZ, or those like productive parts, right? There's that polarization there between like you should be catching up on things, you should be doing things, be a normal adult, right? Versus those shutdowns. There's that polarization. So much of what we do is really provide space. There's space at the table for both these parts. About those masking parts, and those parts can carry a lot of internalized ableism about what you should be doing, right? A normal person is able to work 40 hours a week and have a clean house and have kids that are in karate and gymnastics and do all those different things, and that part has a lot of internalized ableism beliefs. So what IFS really allows us to do is connect to those parts and actually help them release some of what isn't theirs, like internalized ableism or a legacy burden or things that was given down to them that it's not internal. Obviously, there's also parts that are stimming. Sometimes when I'll have a client be like, all I do is I scroll. That's it. I don't do anything else. I just scroll in my bed all day. Well, sometimes I'll say, well, you're scrolling, that scrolling part. What if it's a stim, right? What if it's your avoidance part, making sure that you're not wasting more spoons or more energy, right? By just scrolling, there's no cost to that either. So really seeing things as parts, and sometimes clients, I think, struggle sometimes, right, with with parts language, but sometimes they don't. Like sometimes people take to it right away, but other times you might get pushback, like, well, especially the shutdown part. I'm not a part. This is me. This is who I am, right? But that's when we can then start to talk directly to that part and be like, yeah, I get it. Like you are the client, right? Sometimes there is that pushback, but then that's when we kind of look back at other parts of them too. It's like, yeah, well, you might be shut down now, but I know when you're at work all day, like there's a part of you that's making, that's really pushing you through. So those are some common protectors that I see, and I know everyone really sees with their clients. And using IFS with neurodivergent clients. As I was saying, self-acceptance to me is key, right? From the very early on, when we identify parts that clients want to change, I want to be able to do more, right? Or I want to be able to, spend more time with friends and family, right? We can look at those parts, but I oftentimes will then celebrate those parts as well that love already. that want to have those relationships. You know, I'll say, like, it's like your life is like a pizza, right? If there's just one slice that loves you, we try to really kind of build that, right? If we're stuck on a part that just uses a lot of hatred of, like, you're not doing well, you need to keep up, you're a failure, right? I will identify parts that believe that they're not broken, that they are trying really hard, and I like to really build those. Obviously, patience is something we all use as therapists, but especially with, with neurodivergent clients, like, every system is so unique and different that you don't want to, like, necessarily assume what's going on inside of them. But processing in general is different if you're neurodivergent. So if I ask a question, right, I might take extra time to allow the client to identify their part. And even sometimes with autistic and ADHD people, they'll be like, I don't know where that part is. Like, they struggle to find it and connect to it in their own way, or they're not a visual person. So a lot of patience is incredibly important. I also interrupt a lot. Like, it helps that when a client first meets me, I'm like, hey, I'm Britt, I'm also ADHD. So they'll see how talkative I am. But, if I allow a storytelling part, or a part that just wants to vent through the whole session, right, that doesn't really help with any therapeutic work. So, like, sometimes I'll interrupt with, like, let me make sure I'm hearing this correctly, right? And I'll kind of repeat back to the client, so there's a part of you that wants to go to the movie, but there's a part of you that wants to skip the movie. Is that right? And that really helps, with the interrupting, it helps kind of summarize back and helps us get back to the part in question. And not getting discouraged from shutdown, right? All parts are welcome. When we do this work, our clients are incredibly sensitive, and they usually, if they're in therapy to work on vulnerable parts of themselves. So I will see clients shut down in session, where we're talking about a part that has a lot of emotions or a lot of feelings, and then a shutdown part just, like, shows up and the client's then offline, right? So then I spend a lot of time, developing a relationship with the client shutdown, making sure they know there's no right or wrong way to client. There's no right or wrong way to do therapy. I really appreciate this part showed up right now to help ease the emotions and the overwhelm that are coming up as we talk about your mom, right? So when that happens, right, I also then try to help the client have a better relationship with their own shutdown part, because oftentimes they don't like their shutdown parts. But there's just a part of them that doesn't like their shutdown parts. So it's just all about, like, kind of, I think, being flexible with what comes up for the client in the moment. I like to use a lot of analogies and visuals, and that's kind of obvious, so I already talked about today, but I'll use, like, my fidgets here. I'll be like, there's a part of you, right, that wants to eat healthier, but there's a part of you that's addicted to sugar, right? So I'll use, like, a lot of, like I'll use visuals, or, whiteboard, and that's, like, and with IFS, a lot of times, like, I've been in trainings where, like, people who use IFS will use art. Actually, I have something right here that I can show, since we still have some time. This is a example of a exercise that I did. I don't think you can see a kind of an exercise that I did in a training, where we went through, where each box was an example of how I'm feeling connected right now, or how I'm feeling clear right now. So there's a lot of cool things to do with parts work. And manifesting. Like, I had a client say, I can't, I asked a bunch of questions about the client. They're saying, I'm feeling sadness right now. So I was asking the client, tell me about how that sadness is manifesting right now within you. And they had a really hard time even describing their sadness. So I used a resource called Online Sand Tray. I don't know if anybody knows what that is. I'll kind of put that in here in the Online Sand Tray. But Online Sand Tray is this really cool, like, free resource online, where there's a sand tray and there's a bunch of different pictures where you can kind of drag. And so I asked the client, well, when you look at all these pictures, which one speaks to your sadness part? And then I gave, this client a couple of minutes, and he picked up a picture that represented sadness, and that really took us the rest of the way. So using visuals is incredibly important, and they talk all about that in IFS trainings about how to use visuals, how to really explore the different parts within a client. I also share a lot of my own experiences, which I think helps with validation, right? Like I'm being incredibly, I disclose a lot here, and I'm kind of the same way in session, right? Where I will maybe disclose like, yeah, like I've had a really hard day. I'm really behind on a bunch of things, but that's because I was at the museum all day on Sunday with my family. And so I was really drained, which made it really hard for me to keep up the rest of the week. Right. So I'll explain that to my clients, and it brings about that sense of community of support, that they're not alone, that one of the key things, right, is that like we have less spoons and different things drain us, compared to maybe people who are holistic, right, or who are more neurotypical. So I definitely disclose a lot and bring in my own experiences for teaching reasons and for supportive reasons and validation reasons. And I also really like using psychoeducation. We don't say that somebody has an autistic part or somebody has an ADHD part. What we do say is there are parts of clients that respond particularly to the autism or respond to ADHD, right? So yourself is autistic or yourself is ADHD, and that's that core sense, right? So like back to that example with like that productive part that's always telling me I should be doing more, right? I might say to a client, that is really typical for ADHD people to feel like they're always behind. It really makes sense. So you have a part that's concerned about that, that's concerned that you're always behind, right? So I really like psychoeducation. I like encouraging my clients to read, Unmasking Autism. I encourage them to be aware of what is going on with them biologically, right? Because that helps bring that self-acceptance. That helps bring that validation that if they want to leave, like because they're out with friends and they're exhausted, that is okay, that they know what they need. And that's what I love about IFS is that it gives you a clue. Everybody knows what they need, right? And it says what you need, right? We'll talk to clients and they'll be like, yeah, I didn't know what to do. I was freaking out. And then by the end of the session, they realized they knew what they needed. They just didn't listen to all of their parts. Here's a good example. I had a client who really wanted to get a cat and went, we talked a lot about it and there was a lot of moving pieces. And one of the steps that they took was they went to the shelter just to look at the cats. Well, when they got to the shelter, like the policy of the shelter was to kind of fill out an application and then you can visit the cats. So my client was kind of pressured into taking a cat home that day. And meltdown kind of ensued after that. Like there was a part of my client that was so excited to have the cat there, but there were so many other parts that weren't ready at home, that weren't ready emotionally, just weren't ready and weren't expecting that. And so they ended up having to return the cat after a couple of days, but they realized they knew at the shelter that they weren't ready to take that cat home, but they thought that it'd be weird and they didn't know how to use their social interactions and make sure to have those boundaries in place. So I really like to kind of focus on, there's a part that knew what you needed and you heard it, right? But there was a part of you that chose not to listen. So let's think about why. What was it about that? What was that part afraid would happen? If you walked out without taking a cat, what was that part afraid would happen? What would they think of you? So overall, again, I want to also note this beautiful piece of artwork by a neurodivergent artist. So here we go. Just kind of final resources. I had a couple of books up there about IFS. Some of the ones that, they're all really great. No Bad Parts is, to me, an incredible resource. But if you as a therapist are really more interested, just reading the Internal Family Systems book gives a really good understanding of what IFS is. And then once you have a good understanding of what IFS is, I really highly recommend Transcending Trauma as well, and the somatic one. I'm currently reading the somatic one right now, and it's been really helpful for me to find parts within clients when they're not visual, because I'm an incredibly visual person, and a lot of our clients are not. They don't connect to their parts in that way. So you can kind of find parts within our bodies in different ways. That's also really helpful. And if you do want to learn more about IFS, besides reading, I definitely recommend reading a book, making sure you like it. But you can visit the IFS Institute. There's trainings. There's level 1, 2, and 3 training. There's also the IFS online circle and the continuity program. Oh, there's a question. Okay, great. What do you find challenging about doing IFS via telehealth? I think for me, I think in general, this is probably for telehealth in general, it's just not being able to be with the person in the moment. I think we all feel that way when it comes to telehealth, that like, if, wanting to be in the room with somebody, to give that extra, having them feel my self energy, because a lot of times we as therapists, we stay in self during session. Well, that's ideally, right? But we stay in self during session. And so that energy can really bring a lot of help for the client to start understanding their own parts. So that can be the biggest thing. And I also really like using visuals, like and using more artwork and helping draw out and map out parts. And if I was in person, I'd be like, okay, I put a piece of paper in front of them. Go ahead, draw. What are you feeling? Draw what your sadness part is feeling, that, right? So I do wish that I was in person sometimes, just to bring the art piece into it. And one other thing I kind of want to pick up, please again, throw your questions in there. The other thing is, what I like about IFS is that it really does help therapists, right? Because if I'm struggling with a client, and obviously I do, we all struggle with clients, we are taught in the IFS community to kind of be curious about what part of me is triggered by this client, right? What's going on, where and what part of me needs support during the session or while we're in session. And that really kind of helps, I think, everybody have a maybe more proactive counseling type of session. Okay. I guess that kind of wraps up. Oh, I almost made it to an hour. Awesome. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out. I love collaboration. I love discussing IFS, especially with neurodivergent people. We're really trying to grow our community of IFS people who are neurodivergent. That is something that we've been trying to do for a while, because since the Institute had a ABA affirming person talk last year. So we've been trying to really push back against and really trying to bring a neurodiversity affirming environment to the IFS community. And in some ways they're responding, in some ways they're not. And it's tough because, neurodiversity is more invisible than racism or all the other isms. So if you are interested in IFS, please reach out. I am a newbie and I just love connecting with others. So thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it.
Okay, Britt, thank you so much. This was incredible. I'm so glad it's recorded. I want to go back and watch parts of it again. I want to share a gratitude for you, and then I have a question. So I just am so grateful to be in community with you. The first time that you showed up to our consult over a year ago, I didn't know that you were an IFS provider or anything like that. But when you asked a question, you just brought such an authentic, vulnerable version of yourself and acknowledged your different parts that were struggling and complex and holding different feelings. And it had a huge impact on me, and your continued presence has had a big impact on me and helped me have more kindness and compassion to my parts that are afraid of being exposed as an imposter. And I just really, really appreciate your presence and how you've helped shape this community.
What a compliment. I'm almost speechless, and that doesn't happen, right? We know that. So thank you so much for sharing that. Like, incredible.
Yeah, I really loved what you brought up. I hadn't thought about this before, but how IFS could help your relationship with your client because it gives you a modality to come back and reflect on the therapeutic relationship and what's happening in you in that relationship. I love that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In my IFS consult groups, the majority of the time, I'll go to the consult group thinking I'll get all these skills and strategies, but really it's just the facilitator going, well, as you ask that question, what's coming up for you? What part of you is upset? Right. And then we end up just like kind of soothing the therapist parts that are around a particular client or around.
Yeah.
It always blows my mind. I was in one this morning where I was like, we're gonna get so much good strategies. And it was none of that. It was just supporting everybody's vulnerability when it comes to like working with tough clients. So
Oh, I love that.
yeah.
So my question, oh, was there more? Okay. So my question is like when clients come and they've already developed some language around parts, either on their own or in previous therapy, it's really easy to jump in. For clients who have not encountered this concept, how do you start introducing it?
Great question. I think you kind of already answered it based on what you said in the beginning, which was it's in me, right? So a client will show up and be like, oh, I'm just so frustrated with my husband. He does X, Y, and Z. So I'll go, okay, so there's a part of you that's really annoyed by your husband. Uh-huh. And they're like, yeah, like he never cleans up the house, never takes care of the kids. So I'll just start kind of using parts language right off the bat, right? And say, here's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing there's a part of you that's really frustrated with your husband, but there's also a part of you that doesn't want to leave the relationship, right? And then we start to really talk about that, and it'll get me to, when you talk about this part of you that is frustrated with your husband, what are you noticing inside of your body? So, I oftentimes will feel that the beginning times with a client, when I start responding with summarizing back using parts language, most take to it really quickly. Or sometimes I'll even say like, you're going to hear me use this parts language a lot, right? Or I'll say I'll even use an example, there's a part of me, like especially in a first session, I'll start off with the first session, like there's a part of me that is kind of excited and really wants to bring in a good first impression. So I just use it right off the bat. And because it's in me, it just comes so naturally.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And it also, like, if you are interested in IFS, like you read any IFS book, like they kind of talk about it, how to kind of introduce it. I know like the level 1 talks a lot about that. But I rarely have clients that kind of reject it. They'll have parts that reject it, right? They're like, oh, I'm not a part, stop saying that, right? And if that kind of comes up, right, like then that means that they're very much blended, and there's a part of them that kind of offended that is just a part to them, right? So I just kind of stay as curious and as possible. And sometimes we use different language if they don't like the parts language. Like, okay, so there's a sensation that you have, there's a feeling that you have. So okay. Yeah. Again, thank you, everybody. And I, again, really appreciate it. I nerd out about this stuff. And please reach out. Last time, a couple of people did reach out, so I really hope it happens again. I love being a part of this community and learning, and I just can't wait to continue doing so.